SkySwitch, and today I want to share with you how to do SIP trunk failover. So this would be the case where you had a customer that had an IP PBX or a SIP-enabled device out on site, and you have set up SIP trunks, a SIP trunk with SIP trunk channels in order to allow that customer to operate on the SkySwitch platform. But you also have, the need, or the customer has the need to redirect calls in the event that the SIP trunk fails. So I'm going to show you today how to get that accomplished. So we'll start off here, and we're going to utilize this domain, c2c.skyswitch.com. So I'm going to take you to what we refer to as the reseller account level, and at this level you would click on the domain that you have added that is associated with the SIP trunks. And so we're going to use this for our example today. And in this domain, you would then, one of the first things that you want to do is you want to create a user. And we're going to call this user a routing user. So we're going to add user, and I'm just going to name it routing user. And we're going to use the functionality of this user to accomplish the redirect of calls as we need. So we're going to give it an extension. Don't worry about department. It is going to require an email address. Although it's not going to be a real user, it is going to require an email address. We don't need caller ID or enable voicemail or add phone extension, but the form also is going to require a password because it's a required field. So we're going to add this routing user. Okay, now we have routing user 499. Now, in order to accomplish the SIP trunk failover, you're going to need two DIDs. One DID will be the DID that is published that the customer will give out to its customers, your customer's customers, and that's the number they will call in order to call in to the customer. There is a second DID that you're going to need to use in order to accomplish this that will be unpublished, and I'll show you how to use those two numbers to accomplish the failover. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on inventory within that domain. Now I've got two numbers assigned and available in the domain that's associated with the SIP trunks, and it's these two numbers. Now I'm going to use one of them. I'm going to use the 2144 as the published number, and then I'm going to use the 2143 as the unpublished number. So the first thing we want to do is we want to assign the 2144 number to our routing user. Now I know initially this seems a little backwards. What we're wanting to do is we're wanting to direct all calls initially into the customer through a routing user. And we're going to use the answering rules of this routing user in order to accomplish the failover in case we have a failure. Don't need enabled enhanced voicemail, just need a simple treatment of user and sending it to 499, the routing user. So that's the main number. That's the number the customer's going to publish, and all their customers are going to call that number. They're going to be directed to this routing user, and then in that routing user, we're going to use answering rules to accomplish our failover. Now, the other assignment we need to make is for this number that's not published, this 2143. So let's go, now we need to assign that to the SIP trunk. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back up to View All Domains, and at the reseller account level, we're going to click on Inventory, and we're going to assign that number to the SIP trunk. So let's Now let's click on filters and let's filter for our domain. And the reason we're back up at the reseller account level is because in regards to assigning DIDs to SIP trunks, you want to do it at the reseller account level, not at the domain level. So we'll click on the number here and we'll assign it to the SIP trunk that we have on that domain. I'm just going to pull this node out, and this is all we need here. So now we have a number assigned to the SIP trunk and a number that we're unpublished, a number that we're not going to publish assigned to the SIP trunk, and a number that is published that we've assigned to the routing user. So now let's go back into the domain, and what we want to do is now set the answering rules in the routing user as we need them to do the failover. So let me show you how you want to set those. So you'll click on users, we'll navigate into the routing user 499 and the answering rules. Now we're just going to use this default active answering rule that gets created when we create our user, add our user. So, and we're going to edit that rule. Okay, in this rule, we're just going to use that default time frame, which is always. Now, we're going to always forward our calls in this rule to our unpublished number. That's the 3422143. And then we're going to, when unanswered, we're going to send it to send the calls to where we want to send them. For now, I'm just going to put my cell phone, and we would send calls to my cell phone. Now, let me state here, you can send calls to any number, any extension. So you could create an auto attendant on this domain, and you could send these calls to an auto attendant. You could send them to a call queue. You could send them to an extension. You could send them to voicemail. You could send them to an outside number, just like I'm doing here with my cell phone. And so now let me explain how this works in the event of a failure. So as we save this, we now have all the calls. We assign the main number, the published number, to send calls through this routing user. And the first rule is that we're always forwarding to the number that is assigned to the SIP trunk, 469-342-21443. So all the calls are flowing through this routing user. And what happens is, if this forward always fails in any way, so if the internet access goes out or any of the equipment fails that's in the line to the customer location, the SIP trunks go down, and this routing user cannot make calls to 469-342-2143, then it's going to immediately trigger the forward when unanswered. Now the system knows that it's not going to wait the ring time. It knows that if it cannot forward calls, then to automatically forward when unanswered to my cell. So this is how you would set up the failover utilizing a routing user. Now let me state here that the ring time is important. You want your ring time to be longer than the ring time on your SIP-enabled device or your IPPBX that's on site. So if your IPPBX is set to 30-second ring time, I would probably set this ring time to 40 seconds. What you want here is you do not want the routing user to interfere with calls. You want to allow the IPPBX or the SIP-enabled device out of the customer prem to handle the call functionality. But what you're wanting to happen is, if that fails, or the SIP trunk fails, or the internet access, and that goes down, and this routing user is no longer able to forward those calls, then he will then forward when unanswered to whatever number you've assigned. So this is a simple way of handling SIP trunk failover. And like I said, you can send these calls if the SIP trunk fails, you can send them to an auto attendant and set up that auto attendant, and it'll appear that the customer's not down at all. Or you could send it to voicemail. We've had situations where we've sent them to voicemail. And with voicemail, you can also have a notification that goes to email. So if in the event that you have a customer that has SIP trunks and it has a failure, then this is a good way of keeping the customer up and running, either through voicemail or auto attendant. And through an auto attendant, you could assign each user in the business with an extension, or and have it forward always to their cell phones. So there's just many different ways you can utilize this functionality of this routing user and the hosted functionality of the domain associated with the SIP trunk to accomplish the failover. I hope this helps you, and just thank you for being a SkySwitch customer. Bye.